The great ones, they're different. They really are. Not better, just different. Sure, there's a physical power, a mental strength, a complex but resolute constitution too. There's a whole lot more than just the measurables. That's something else, that intangible. It separates us from them. Welcome to the Legends series on Andy Raymond Unfiltered. Coaches, they are a little different. The position and the pressures can change a man's character. Not this one though. Living by the same principles and values, unaffected by the game that affects most. He's one of the game's true gentlemen. But who is Neil Henry?
Good question. I'm born in Hobart. Dad's an Englishman. He came out as a 10-pound pom when he was 15 when his father died in England, and met Mum in Port Kembla. He was a merchant navy guy, and they got married, and shortly after that I was born in Hobart because his mother emigrated out to there with a couple of his brothers. So, but I was only there a few years, and he went to night school. He's a welder and became a customs officer. So his first transfer, his first job as a customs officer was to Darwin. So I often went to Darwin for about 8 or 9 years. So I sort of remember fond memories of Darwin and growing up there. And then he got transferred to Canberra. So when I was 11 years old, I moved to Canberra. And the bulk of my life I've lived in Canberra and did my high school there and a teaching degree and taught there for about 16 or 17 years before I started full-time coaching.
So I'm trying to get this clear. How does a man born in Tasmania who moved to Darwin and played his junior footy in Canberra become such a passionate Queenslander?
Well, I've lived in Queensland for a long time. I've never lived in New South Wales, but to be honest, when we had State of Origin barbecues at home, my wife would always support Queensland and I support New South Wales, just so we'd have a bit of banter against each other, and because her father was born in Milla in the Atherton Tableland, so we'd have a bit of banter there, and I had a good patch there where New South Wales were winning a few, but it really came about when I was assistant coach to Graham Murray. Yeah. And Mal, I knew Mal from Canberra and my coaching in Canberra, and Mal rang me up and we talked about Origin. He said, well, I've got the gig in 2006. Would you be interested in helping out? And obviously we had a number of players at the Cowboys at that time that would be representing Queensland. So, and I said, yeah, mate, I'd be happy to do that. And I agreed. And then I found out a couple of weeks later that Graham Murray, Muzzer, who I was working with, he had the New South Wales job. So I had to go back to Muzzer and go, mate, because he said it's okay. And I didn't know in the meantime he's actually had the New South Wales job, and he said, mate, I'm happy to stay and look after the team. But to Muzz's credit, he said, no, we'll be right. So off we went, and I started coaching Origin back then. I think it was a link to New South Wales.
You're a foundation player for the Canberra Raiders, 1982. Where did you play, and what type of footballer were you?
I think I was on the average scale. I was a good bush footy player. I was consistent. In 82 there was a lot of local guys got an opportunity to play. Obviously the start-up of the Canberra Raiders and playing out at Seaford Oval. So a whole bunch of us went along to trials and we got graded, and I got graded in 82, 83 and 84. I was captain of the third grade for a while, and then but in 82 I did my ACL and missed a season and came back and played a bit of reserve grade. I didn't play first grade, but I was a centre 5'8", more of a defender than an attacker. And you look at how players have evolved now and how much they practice. I wished I would have had that attitude around working on my craft a bit more than I did. But went on to play until I was 35, local footy and captain coaching, and a few hundred games in local Group 8 competition and Group 16. So I really ended up having a long career and a stint in England as well.
When did you figure out playing wasn't going to pay the bills, but maybe coaching might?
I was PE teaching, so I coached school sides anyway. And actually, when I was at Hawker College, year 11 or year 12, I was in year 12, I was 17, and my local club I was playing for West Port Conan, they needed coaches for the second team and the under-12s. They didn't have coaches, so a mate of mine, Glenn Croker, and I said, well, go and coach the under-12s, and we're both 17. So that was my very first team. We won a couple of games that year, and but it was interesting coaching 12-year-olds and being at high school. And then when I did my degree, I started teaching. I was coaching school sides and schoolboy sides around ACT. So I was a captain coach locally as well in Group 8 and Group 16. So I decided I liked coaching, and as a captain coach, actually, that was a really good experience, actually running a first grade club and coaching a squad of, say, 35 players and then having staff and involved. I think it was a great grounding for me as a 28-year-old.
Early days, do you base your coaching theories on your own personal values and principles, or are you replicating things and traits of personality from others that you've witnessed?
Well, yeah, I had some. You pick up things from different coaches, and I'd like to take a bit. We had Robert Camden, Tubby Camden at the Raiders was the first third grade coach, and I thought he was a very, very good coach. And then you mix that with another guy there, Brian Burke, who coached us at Westport Conan, who was a fitness nut. And he brought an element of, well, at least we're going to be fit, you know, like to the bush footy, to the Group 8 team, our local club, which we hadn't had. And he sort of made the club in that way. And I thought, well, what rubbed off on me was that if you're fit, you're half a chance. Like if you're willing to work hard, and the game demands that, and you work hard at training. And he was one of the first guys to bring in, it used to be Tuesday, Thursday training, playing the weekend. But we'd train Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. He'd put an extra day in there. And sometimes we'd get the day off if we'd trained well or played well. So that work ethic stuck with me. So I always wanted teams to work hard and be fit and at least give themselves a chance to be in games. So Don Ferner, was around then too, coaching, which was great. I saw Tim Sheens in operation. He's a very astute coach too when I was involved with the Raiders and then in the Canberra community. So those sorts of guys. And then later it was, around Graham Murray when I was assistant coach to him. He was fantastic, very good with people and manager and had a temper and had high standards, but he could really manage the group really well. So I learned a fair bit off him as well.
You said you learned work ethic. I'll counter that by saying there's a huge element, I believe, of work ethic that is a natural trait. Would you agree there?
Yeah, I think you can, as a coach, you can fall into the trap of trying to change players a bit too much, thinking that your influence is going. In certain regards, you can give them leadership or purpose, or you can take an interest. There's things like that, but I found that if you haven't got a strong work ethic, and you see that in a player, at some stage it's hard to turn that around. It's going to manifest itself at the wrong time in a pressure situation. So I think you're right. A lot of these things are ingrained a little bit through maybe upbringing or just determination to do well, and the motivation that's intrinsic. And so I think that you're right. You can spend a lot of time on a few players trying to get to where you neglect your bulk of your players that are already got that inbuilt, and you want to work on them because they want to be there and they want to get better, and you don't have to motivate them.
Players learn, they mature, they make mistakes and they change. Does a coach have a similar path, or is there not as much forgiveness in terms of coaches making mistakes?
It's changed. There's not a lot of forgiveness nowadays. I think the media will jump onto things. I think there's a lot of undue pressure and speculation about coaching positions on the back of a few losses, and I think that's really changed in the last, I suppose, 5-6 years in particular. And that makes it hard on coaches. And so the organisations really have to not listen to outside noise and be comfortable in what they've got in place and the structures they've got there and move on. And I think there's been examples where clubs have stuck by the coaches and they've come out the other side.
Agreed. By
doing a look at actually, well, how do we operate as an organisation? What can we be better at to support the coach and the football department? And but other clubs don't. And the churn rate of coaches now, 21 coaches there's 4 coaches a year, I think. I think it's 40 coaches in the last 10 years. So it's averaging 4, and there was 5 this season. So it's too high, and we need to look at, and the churn rate of CEOs has been quite high too in the last 5 or 6 years. So I think we need stable organisations, well-run businesses to the whole organisation has got to push in the right direction. But I think, to get back to your question, I think that it has changed, and there certainly needs to be support for coaches, not just head coaches, assistant coaches.
Griffin Air Conditioning offers the highest quality of air conditioning sales and service across the Sydney metropolitan area, providing installation and maintenance to commercial, domestic and industrial customers. Working with this team, you'll be guaranteed the latest services, technology and developments in the industry. Visit griffinair.com.au and tell them we sent you for a cool deal.
Coaching's been described in other interviews as addictive. Yes or no?
I think it is. For me, it was it's all consuming, and it's a roller coaster because even the most successful teams, are at about 66%. So every 3 weeks you're going to lose a game. Yeah. So you don't get on big runs too often. I mean, the run that Penrith had this year was unbelievable. They were up, but they didn't get the ultimate prize in the end. So, and so you win one week and you're right and you're happy, and you lose the next week and you're kicking stones, and then you're looking to make changes, or you're trying to work out where you can be better, and that's the nature of the beast, and it comes around pretty quickly. 24 rounds and you're playing those games. So it is a roller coaster, and it is addictive because you don't have much time between reviewing what you've done, previewing the opposition, and then getting into there, making your selections, looking at your injuries, and then moving forward. And that's why you need good people around you. And I think that's the key to coaching, is that you've got good lieutenants, you've got good assistant coaches, a good strength and conditioning, good medical team, good physio team. So you can let them do their job, and they need to be able to do that because you can't micromanage.
Combining the answers of the last couple of questions, outside noise in rugby league, often far too loud and heard far too much. But the 66% you just mentioned, any head coach would be delighted with 66% winning ratio. It isn't a huge number in real terms, and that's where the pressure starts, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And look, you lose a few games at the start of the year and you're none from 3, all this talk already. I mean, in reality, you need to win about 50% of your games to be pushing the 8.
Yeah.
And there every year there's 8 teams that make it and 8 don't. So the pressure's on those 8 that don't make it. But the reality is only 50% of the competition can make the final. So, and really, top 4 is where you have to be. That's
safe.
History's sort of shown that to be a serious contender to win it, you need to be in that top 4. And even for a long time, I mean, you had to be in the top. One of the top 2 defensive teams in the competition was the winner of the Premiership for something like 15 years. So you really have to be at that level. And to make the 8 is one thing, but to make the 4 consistently is a good achievement.
A player gets noticed because of a performance, whether it's a sidestep, a tackle, a try. How does a coach get noticed, an emerging coach, because it's probably not as clearly defined?
It's not, and it tends to be picked on who you know, and to be honest, player-manager influence.
Yeah.
Or coach-manager influence, and there is an issue around coaches being managed by player managers. There is a conflict of interest there.
A huge conflict of interest.
Huge. And I've never had a manager, but coaches, it will be detrimental to how your name is out there, because you need someone pushing your barrow, your case, and to the powers that be at clubs. So player managers still have a major influence in the coaches that are out there. But you're right, unless you are a former great of the game or you've done something, it's quite hard for coaches to get a foot in the door.
It's a slow progression, isn't it?
It
Unless
is.
if you haven't played 200 games and 14 origins.
Yeah, and I think history has shown that not all of those players make good coaches. And to be fair, a lot of these players are thrown into coaching, and it's a bigger beast than they ever imagined. And some have been able to ride the bumps and stay around, and others haven't. They've only lasted a few years and gone. But I think we're starting to see a little bit more, which is happening in major sports throughout the world too, that there's career coaches. There are coaches that have done their time, been development coaches, understand the game, done some study in coaching about leadership and management, and they've come into coaching. I mean, the AFL have got a few coaches now that weren't outstanding players. We've got a couple in the NRL now. The NFL's seeing it as well. So I think you're getting organisations are getting their head around saying we just need the best candidate. It doesn't have to be an ex-player or an ex-Australian player, a rep player, whatever. We just need a coach that can do the job. And they're doing their due diligence a bit more, and I think we're seeing that some young coaches now are starting to get opportunities in the game that weren't there before. We used to recycle a lot of our coaches, you know, and now we're seeing you're starting to branch out a little bit, and some organisations do have things in place to actually produce coaches. Okay, so they do have a mentorship program, they do have a production line, they do have a succession policy in place. They're saying, well, if you bide your time here, well, when our head coach moves on, you're likely to be the man to step into that job. And I think that's a bit of forward planning that organisations need to have. You need to have a plan B, or you need to have a plan in place to say, well, how are we running our football department? Who do we need to keep? Who do we need to upskill? If they can't do the job, well, who do we need to move? But I think at last we're starting to see some of these young coaches come through.
Western Reds in 97 as the 19 coach, Canberra lower grades in 99, and because you can't stay in the one city for too long, you wandered off to North Queensland as a first grade assistant. How did the opportunity come about?
Yeah, well, it was... Well, I'll step back. I got the opportunity to go to Perth because of the Super League year. I could take a year off teaching, and I went there, and Dean Lance went to be the head coach, and he said, mate, if we can get you a teaching job over there, would you come over? So if you can find me a PE job there, I'll go. So I went there, and then I met Peter Parr.
Yep.
Peter Parr was coaching the reserve grade. So I met Parry there, and then we folded after 1 year, and I went back to Canberra, and then they went across, took over Adelaide Rams, and Parry was the football manager and Dean was coaching. They said, why don't you come over to Adelaide Rams? So I took leave again, but the Teachers Association, they said, I had to resign. So I resigned and went over there on a 3-year deal. We didn't last to the pre-season. So Adelaide Rams, I've gone from 2 clubs that went broke, or not broke, they were just closed down. And anyway, the NRL was formed. And so I came back to Canberra and I started working with the juniors there and coaching locally, and had the local Monero team as well. So I got a job coaching the under-18s, then the under-20s. And so I did that, and I stayed in contact with Parry, and he went from being a football manager at the Adelaide Rams to being development work at the Broncos. So we stayed in contact, and then News Limited took over the running of the Cowboys.
Yeah.
And Murray Hurst was sacked, replaced 3 rounds in, and then Graham Muzzer got the job up there, but he didn't really have an assistant. He had Adrian Thompson helping him out a bit and coaching as well. So I then, we stayed in contact, and then I was coaching in 2002, and Parry rang me and said, Muzzer's interested in meeting you because for being an assistant coach, because he'd mentioned my name. So they drove down to Canberra, and we were playing on the Sunday. They must have played Saturday. And I remember the game because it was the game Sonny Bill Williams was playing for their 20s, and I think he scored 4 tries. We got smashed.
Wow.
Yeah, but it was the week after they lost their 37 points.
Okay, yeah.
Anyway,
salary cap scandal.
Yeah, so we went out and had a beer at the casino in Canberra. That's where they were staying with the hotel there, and had a beer, talked footy for a couple of hours. Anyway, at the end of the conversation, I thought, I've got to get a cab home. And Muzzer said, we'd like to offer you a contract for a couple of years to come up north. I I said, oh.
On the spot?
On the spot. I thought, how good's that? I must have done some talking. So, but obviously I preferred to stay in Canberra because I was in the system there, and I went home and spoke to Kath and my wife, and she said, look, it's full-time coaching. You said you haven't been able to get a gig here full-time. Why don't you do it? And I said, righto. So I rang him back the next day, and that 2 years turned to 4 years, and I had 4 great years there under Muzzer.
You must have backed yourself.
Well, I thought when I went there, I did have an opportunity to coach full-time in Canberra when Mal was coaching, but the money, I was coaching under 20s and teaching, and we had, had a couple of young kids at that stage, and so I'm thinking, well, I was going to get substantially more money being a full-time assistant coach than I was, doing my PE teaching, coaching in the 20s. So I thought just financially we couldn't afford it, so I said no. And then Michael Maguire actually started. That's when he started coaching full-time in Canberra, Madge, because he was teaching PE too at the same stage. And anyway, he's a fair bit younger than me. And I thought maybe I had an opportunity to go and work with Ian Millwood in England, but it wasn't viable. He was coaching St Helens, but I didn't really know Basil. But anyway, through a friend of a friend, and I thought, no, we just couldn't make it work financially. And I just thought maybe my ship had sailed around coaching full-time, and I was happy to just be coaching part-time and teaching.
Yep.
Anyway, that ended up, I ended up going up there, and that was a bit of a gamble, but the 2 years was fine. I could take some leave, and off I went, and Kath was happy to move the family up, and as I said, that we had 4 great years there initially, and they extended my contract in that first year to a 4-year deal.
If you're enjoying Andy Raymond Unfiltered, the Legends series, we'd love for you to go to Apple, Spotify, or wherever you're listening and subscribe to the podcast and give us a 5-star rating and review. Best weekly review wins an Unfiltered Trucker's hat.
If I had to ask you what was the one thing you learnt from Graham Murray, what would it be?
I think to have a sense of humour. He's a great storyteller.
Yes, he is.
And he came through an era, a great era. The man that stepped aside for Peter Sterling. And Little Artie and all that sort of stuff. He came through that era where there were a lot of stories, and he could tell them, and he was always great company. But he always enjoyed himself. He said, look, you've got to celebrate your wins. And it was about, they don't come around that often. Yeah. So he was always, even though you thought we just scraped there, or we didn't play well, but we just got there, never matter. He'd have a beer in his hand and say, boys, just relax.
We won.
And we won. Enjoy this, and then we'll move on to talking about the game after that. And I think that he had that calming influence about, he had his standards. Like he could be hard marker, and he was. But I think he had that outstanding knack of getting the team together.
Around this time, you were asked into the Queensland State of Origin system. How did it come about?
Well, Mel, it might have actually been through Jimmy Bannigan, who had an association with Mal over the years, and I don't think Jimmy rang me. I think he did actually. I think he was talking to Mal, but I knew Mal had got the job, and then Mal gave me a call. And it was just because we knew each other from Canberra. Yeah. Like he was a head coach, and it was a transition between him and Matt Elliott taking over, and I was coaching the 20s. So I knew Mal, and he hadn't been coaching for a few years. And I thought, well, I've got 5 or 6 players up there that I'm working with on a daily basis that will be in the squad, or likely be in the Queensland squad. Including Jonathan Thurston and Matty Bowen and Matt Singh and a few handy players.
Yes, good list.
And a young Matt Scott. And there was a bit of a changing of the guard of the Queensland team. Yeah. And they hadn't won an outright series, I think, since 2001. They had a drawn series, and then they had 3 losses. Yeah. So, and Hagues had stepped aside, and I said, mate, I'm happy to come and give you a hand. And he laughed. He said, it might only be a 1-year gig. He said, and that's how we approached it. And, off we went.
a wonderful era of origin for Queenslanders, an amazing lineup of players. Players learn from coaches. Do coaches learn from players?
Yeah, I've certainly. Coaches don't know everything. And you just can't think that you do. And some players, and a lot of players, do things that are just not coached.
Yep.
They've got instinct. They've got the ability to read the game. These are things that they've done playing backyard footy. There's an old saying: you do that trick shot at training. You keep doing it. You keep doing it. It's not a risk. The great players, they don't see there's a risk in the game when they do that trick shot. They practice it so many times, they know that trick shot's going to work. It's not something they just thought of on the spot and going, oh, yeah, I'm going to kick that ball there on tackle 2. I know because that wing is tucked in there and the fullback's deep. The odds of us getting that ball back are very high.
Yep.
So, whereas players that have that shotgun effect where they don't practice it and they just try it off the top of the head, that'll burn you most times. But I think those special players, I didn't impart that knowledge to Jonathan Thurston. Like, he had that. He was a competitor. Yeah. I didn't teach him to compete. Like, he came like that. And a lot of players are wired around that competitive nature and around how they understand the game. So I think we can give them a bit of advice, point them in the right direction, give them a bit of leadership. You can enhance that. But to say that you actually mould them, I don't think so.
From your time with the Queensland squad, opportunity followed. Was it the dream job, the Canberra Raiders? An opportunity to go home?
It was in that regard. Going back, a lot of mates in Canberra and a lot of people started, just personally just be interested in footy and come along and all that sort of stuff. So in that regard, I was going back home, mum and dad, Cass parents, both in Canberra. So a lot of friends there, and it was easy to come home. I was surprised. I thought I was going down to do an interview as one of the candidates for the job, and we talked footy for a few hours and with Don Ferner Jr. and Simon Hawkins, and they said, I know we've got a 3-year deal here for you. I said, oh, well. So I didn't have an intermediary. I didn't have a manager talking.
Yeah.
So they just rang me up and said, do you want to come down and have a chat? I said, right, and walked away. Had to go back to the Cowboys and say, I'm off. I'm out of here.
Wow. I can't see that happening in 2020.
No. The funny thing was David Waite was doing job interviews for Catalan Dragons. They were starting up in 2006. And I remember into 2005, leading to the 6th series, I got a call from him in the off-season, and I didn't hear from him for ages. And we were already, must have had a pre-season trial game against the Warriors up in Cairns, and we were already in camp. We have a 1-week camp leading into it. And I get a call from David Waite, said, mate, we're interested in you coming to be the Catalans coach. Because they'd made some change around who they had. A local guy, an English coach was supposed to do it, but they changed their mind. Anyway, and I said no to him because I'd already committed. I had 1 more year to go on my deal anyway. And things happen for a reason, I think. And then it was only probably 2 weeks after that I got the call from Canberra and said, we're looking for next year too. And I went down and, so I didn't. My wife keeps talking about me knocking back going to the south of France. Yeah. She won't let me live it down. But that happened, and then off I went to Canberra.
Don't worry about Paris, sweetheart. Let's go back to Belconnen.
Yeah.
In 2008, the Raiders finished the year strongly. They played finals footy. As a roster, it may be judged that they overachieved. It wasn't easy. I love him. Toddy Carney started to find form off the field. Not here to talk about Todd, not here to judge, but it was probably as a coach your first experience of dealing with an off-field issue in a high-profile manner. Media everywhere. Easy or difficult?
It was difficult. And Todd is a complex character, but a likeable larrikin.
Absolutely.
And you could not get a better trainer or a better person to engage with fans or kids doing his stuff as a Canberra Raider. Goulburn kid, been in the system since he was about 16 or so. And I think he obviously reflects and he said, I've lived my life and I've put my hand up for things I've done, which he's always done. He said, can I change it? Well, I can't. I've done those things, would have done some things differently. On reflection, probably, but I've done them. And he's okay with that. And but it came to the point where he'd had a few warnings and a few things were put in place by the club that were fairly strict.
Yeah.
And we're saying, well, we need this sort of governance for your behaviour. And in the end, his management didn't agree to it. Well, then it left the club with no option but.
How was it for you? All of a sudden, you're under the spotlight.
Yeah, it was difficult because I could understand the club culture and making a point, and he'd had opportunities to improve his behaviour and things. He was always good at training, so the players liked playing with him. But I think that they also understood that, well, they did understand that what he did away from the place is not good for the club.
Yeah.
You know, and so it became a board decision, not mine. They made that call.
The board doesn't front press conferences.
No, they don't, and I accepted that, and that I could go back to that. Well, this is a collective decision, and I did consult my senior players, and they weren't jumping up and down saying no, this shouldn't happen. Certainly, they realised they were losing a good player from the squad, but they could understand the club's point of view around behaviour. And which is a credit to them, because we're talking about a cultural shift here a little bit.
Yes.
And the club, well, Todd moved on, and then we had Michael Dobson and Campo turning up and playing some outstanding footy. Yeah. So we went on to rebound as well, and finished sixth.
In part 2 of the Neil Henry story, leaving the Cowboys, his time at the Titans, and the Jared Haynes saga. That's next on Andy Raymond Unfiltered. We hope you're enjoying the podcast, the variety, the names and the different opinions. Before you go, we'd love a quick 5-star rating and review on the podcast app you're listening on, as we look forward to spreading the word into the new year. Come back soon, legends. Welcome back to Andy Raymond Unfiltered, the Neil Henry story, part 2. In part 1, we spoke the early years and his first big break. We covered origin and dealing with Todd Carney's Canberra sacking. The story continues.
For coaches, I see guys that haven't played 200 first grade games and 18 origins as being at a disadvantage, like yourself and Anthony Seibold or a Brad Arthur. A disadvantage in the respect that coaches that have played have dealt with the media for years. They've lived through the off-field stuff. They get used to the awkward lines of questioning. They're used to the spotlight to a degree. You guys aren't. It's got nothing to do with football knowledge at all. Is that a fair call? Because it's a huge personal adjustment, life in the spotlight.
Oh, it is. And, in a small place that's footy mad like Townsville, you can't go anywhere without someone talking to you, saying good day, talking footy. Now, that to me, that's not a negative at all.
Yeah.
Like, I've got no problems with that, and I'm more than happy to to have a chat, because that's what the fans are about. They love their footy. And, the other spotlight is when there's negativity or accountability, or there's no accountability from the media, or there's just a rumour. And it's not a pleasant environment. All coaches go through it when there's rumours about their tenure, about how you're going, and that you're going to be sacked, or you've lost the dressing room. It's a favourite term that journos like to toss up now, and all those sorts of things. Now, where do they get information from? Sometimes organisations leak.
Yeah.
And I've been.
You've lived through that.
I've lived through that. And sometimes player managers have got an agenda and they want to talk to journos, and journos will ring them to get information, and that's it. it's the old thing with the journos. They start with a rumour, and if the rumour goes around and comes back to them, they write it. Now it's
right.
fact because it hasn't really come from me. It's come from all these other people.
Yeah.
And so there are, and the way it's now portrayed that once there's an agenda, that the only thing that can fix that is winning games.
Yep.
But that's a very simplistic approach because the media is so out there now that it does have an effect on the players because it can become a downward spiral a little bit around morale around the place. Now, it's up to the coach to handle that and get the players playing well, but that because you start winning games doesn't mean there's not issues in clubs.
Yeah.
So I think that has been proven too.
Yep.
So you need to handle that, but it does get personal. It does get personal if there's cameras following you around. Like I've had cameras, at the front of my house, in Townsville. I had the same on the Gold Coast. A camera crew following you to where you live and then wanting to do an interview at your front door. Now I think, and I know that happens to other people, but I don't think it's right. And I don't want to wish it on anyone.
Yeah.
A player, shouldn't have that happening. With players or anyone. So that's unpleasant. But people will say, well, you paid good money, you're out there in the media, so you just got to suck it up. I said, well, until you experience that, you might have a different view. It's easy to sit back and to say that that's part of it, but it's not really part of it.
The rumour mill in rugby league, in the game and throughout the media, is vicious and it shows no signs of stopping anytime soon. When you're a head coach and you wake up to 16 missed calls and you know something's happening and it's a rumour, what's your first thought? Is it, oh, fuck, not again? Or are you aware that on occasion where there's smoke, there's fire?
Yeah, well, look, to me, I was pretty relaxed about it. I never sort of go to bed at night thinking, what the player's up to now or what's happening. We did have a bit of a rough trot on the Gold Coast with a few things, and we had players in isolation for a while. They were training on their own. I'd go and see them at a different oval. They were stood down, and and the club, I think, reacted in a pretty straightforward way, which I was okay with. Until everything was sorted out in the courts, it was okay. There is an image to protect there, but you still need to do the right thing by your players. And they hadn't been to court, and so no charges were laid. So it was one of those things. I didn't really worry about it too much. I had faith in other people handling some of those things, but you become the point of call for those things, and it's part and parcel. The rumour, innuendo, side stories. I mean, that's what generates programs. That's the stuff. I mean, we don't really have enough football analysis that's valid in our game, I think. I mean, certain people can do it and a lot of people can't.
No, that's right.
We've now got journos that you would never see their head on screen because they write for the newspapers. Yeah. Suddenly their head's on the screen sometimes twice or three times a week, and they're now the experts of the game. I don't think so. But it carries a fair bit of weight. When
it certainly does.
Yeah, because when that topic is talked about on a show, that then becomes copy as an article
for their paper.
Yeah. So it ends up being online as well, but it might be way off the mark. So I think we've got a lot of armchair experts there that I think that I used to love reading, Warren Ryan when he wrote his columns.
Yeah.
And Steve Ricketts, up here at the Courier Mail, they understood the game.
Yes.
They could write about the game, and it didn't have to always be positive, but what they did, they understood the game. And I think that we live in a world now of really knee-jerk reactions to stuff, and it's got to be a topic. You've got to make the headline worse than the story, and then the journos don't take responsibility. Oh, the headline's not me; it's a sub-editor. But the story's got no relevance to the headline anyway.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't. But it's about selling papers.
Let's be positive. Let's talk about the emergence of Jonathan Thurston. You were on the scene in those early years. Were you aware something special was brewing?
I remember Muzza and Parry went to see him. Peter Parry went to see him play a game in Sydney when he was playing for Canterbury, and then I went and watched him play a couple of games with Parry, and he was playing reserve grade for the Bulldogs, and they were playing out the showground, I think, and
They were.
And I'm thinking, and he had something special. Like he was just pop up all the time. He was on the ball. He'd have a crack. He weighed about 75 kilos, ring and wet. He had his headgear on. There's nothing of him, but he could make things happen around him, and he seemed to have time. He wasn't particularly fast, but when he threw his dummy, he went through, he invariably made a break. So I thought, this guy can play. And he had a couple of halves in front of him, so they'd as well. So Braith and Astrid, I think, had a couple of years to go.
Brent Sherwin maybe around.
Shifty Sherwin.
Yep.
He had a couple of years to go as well. Yep. So he didn't really have an immediate pathway. Yep. And I think that was a selling point. We're saying, well, come up to the Cowboys, you're the starting half and you can run the show. That's what we want.
Yeah.
And thankfully he, I suppose talking to Sammy Ayub and again, the club could see that he was pretty special. So his wages down for the Bulldogs, he wouldn't have been on a lot.
Yeah.
Because they got him out of school.
Yes.
And they did a great job to get him there, and they obviously developed him a bit. But I think we could come in and go, no, we value him at this straight up. And so it made it difficult. And the club got him.
I'm going to reveal some inside stories here and information, but UNR obviously is a very smart footy brain, but even more importantly than that, you have a reputation as a very trusted bloke within a playing group or club, and I think that's actually more important. You would support them unreservedly in on and off-field issues. You back them. Every successful coach needs that trait and that trust. The amount of off-field incidents and issues that happen in every club would probably shock most people. How important is it to be one of the team without being one of the boys?
Yeah, that's a fine line, and you need to to gain your players' trust straight up. I mean, your coaching department's there to extract the best out of your players, to let them be the person that they want to be, and to enjoy success and develop. Now, for some players, that might be just playing one NRL game in your squad, and they've achieved their dream by playing one. We keep forgetting that the 10-year players are quite rare. I mean, the average career is high 40s or 45 to 47 NRL games. We keep forgetting that these 200, 300 game players, they're quite rare considering the percentage of players that play the game. So they're not in the game for a long time. So you've got to maximise their abilities and get them to a point. There is a lot of management. See, there's a massive step up from being an assistant coach where you can be a player's buddy. You're teaching them, you're reviewing their stuff, you're sitting down with them, you're talking to them on the field and all that, but you're not making the hard calls. You're not the guy that's then saying, but you know what, you're not playing this week. Yeah. I didn't think you were too good last week. Give you a couple of reasons. You've got to work on your defence there or your lateral movement, whatever. Yep. Say, need to go back and work on that, and then we'll see how we go. But this guy deserves an opportunity above you. Every week, you're making decisions about dropping and picking players, and that has an impact on them, and sometimes it's negative. They don't agree with you. They don't see it as you see it. If you don't communicate that quite well to the player, well, then they don't really sometimes know why they've been dropped. Yeah. Or they refuse to believe what you said is the reason for it. Some players react differently. And particularly, the older players, they're on the back end of their career, and they're on their way out, and you've got a young guy coming up, that mightn't have the consistency, but you need that energy. And of course, you've just been dropped from your place of work for a week or two or three or four or forever. Contract negotiations. I mean, there's the management side of it, how you handle those relationships is very important. And I was new to it all as a coach, and I didn't have any training in that other than I'd been a teacher, so I'd worked with people and colleagues before, which I think certainly helped. Yeah. And there's quite a number of ex-teachers that have been coaches too, which is no surprise really. But that side of it compared when I stepped out of being an assistant coach to a head coach was a massive step up, because now you are, as you talked about before, we are front and centre for media. Yep. We are the focal point for the club. You're running a department and all the players. So the questions come to you. So I think that but the trust is integral part of it. Things that you say to a player in the confidence of your office, or even you say to your squad in the sanctum of you're talking about an issue with the playing group, should not get out of those walls. It should not be mentioned. It's only relevant there. If you've got an issue you're talking about as a group and you're saying this is important to us, we need to keep this here, okay, move on. Those sorts of organisations where it doesn't get out, they're the ones that are going well, okay, because there's not leaks there, there's players are buying into what it's about. But again, that trust between you and the player for an issue that might be completely out of football, and often is,
it is.
That is really important. And that you can help that player and say, well, listen, Avenue, let's go and see this person about that. It might be financial advice, it might be mental health issues, it might be family or relationship problems. You need to talk about it. Okay, we need to sort this out.
Any elite athlete will tell you it takes more than just being physically fit to be at your best. And our friends at Galaxy Finance can have you at the top of your financial game. From home loans to investments and self-managed super funds, they provide complete solutions. Call Galaxy Finance on 1300 91 7740 and mention you heard it on Andy Raymond Unfiltered to get an obligation-free chat to see how Galaxy Finance can assist you.
You've just mentioned speaking to a playing group within the dressing room at training, and you term it the inner sanctum, which it is, and it should be the vault where nothing escapes. You wake up 2 days later and your conversation is relayed in the media. What's your first thoughts?
Yeah, it's disappointing, and you can let it burden you a little bit, and then try and have a bit of a witch hunt to find out. But I found that's a waste of time.
Is it? Yeah.
Yeah, I think I've handled it before with my senior players, saying that, well, we've talked about this and this has got out. We need to find out, or we need to, if you know, deal with it. I don't need to know. You come and nod and say it's been dealt with. I don't need to know who it was.
Yep.
So we just need to be able to say that we're a tight ship here. This is what's happened, and it's got out. And player managers ask their players questions. Well, how did you react to that 50-point loss on the weekend?
Yeah.
What was said? Did you have an emergency meeting or something? And then that suddenly becomes a crisis meeting at the club. Players, demand answers. Oh, who knows? But that has happened, and I'd say that it'd be through management normally.
July 29, 2013, you got the tap on the shoulder, as I've found out. We all get it at some stage.
Yep.
Obviously disappointed, but how do you deal with it because it is in such a public manner? Within an hour, the world of rugby league knows.
Yeah, it was disappointing at the Cowboys for a couple of reasons. One was that the decision was made to not give me my extension, which was agreed to, at a board meeting. But I was going to be told a few weeks later. Okay. But in the media, straight after that board meeting, which might have been on a Friday or Saturday, I think we played Cronulla. I think we had a win. Anyway, it happened. I started to then get questions, something about rumours about Neil Henry's contract is not going to be honoured. So it came out. So from that board meeting, it was in the media 2 days later. And that was difficult.
So that's someone at a high level.
Yeah, so someone out of that board meeting, or out of that who knew, it got out because it was on radio, and it was a couple of, and then I started. So we didn't win a game, and then we won one, and then I started getting asked questions, and I knew nothing about it. So I was just towing the line, which I knew. I said, I've agreed to a further 12-month extension on my contract. So we were on track to play finals. Well, we did. We played finals football for those 3 years in a row. And I thought, well, okay. But so I was disappointed that obviously that these things happen. And true to form, when a certain person came back from overseas, called into the office and bang, we're not going to, okay. I said, well, I sort of knew that. I've actually been dealing with this when you've been away.
In your absence,
In your absence. So I said, that points towards this organisation.
Yeah.
I had a crack back. But you know what? At the end, you can't be bitter about it. I mean, I had 5 years there. We made 3 finals out of it. There is an element, I talk to people about it, there is an element of your voice does become tired after a while, and they want it desperately to win a competition.
Yep.
And coaches have to reinvent the wheel around staff and, staff underneath them and roll staff around, whether it's strength and conditioning or assistant coaches or whatever. You might have a couple of stable staff you keep for a long time, but then you rotate voices around that. I think you need to change things up. We had bowed out of the finals in some controversial terms. For
More than controversial, yeah.
In
2 years or 2 years in a row?
2 years in a row.
Yeah.
And we went on a run and made the finals in my last year there too. And Greenie came in and did a great job.
Yep.
The squad was ready to go. He added a couple of players, which certainly, and he's a good coach, and I was really happy that they got the job done. I'm disappointed I wasn't there for it. Every coach's dream is to win a grand final for their organisation, but you can't be bitter. I moved on and came down to the Titans, and I was disappointed in how it panned out.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's a club decision.
You laid the platform for the Premiership, but didn't win the Premiership. Paul Green did. Did anybody from the Cowboys ever pick up the phone and say, I know you weren't here on grand final day, but thanks?
Oh, no. I think when I was going, I had a number of players come and see me, and they didn't agree with it. I had a good relationship with a number of guys.
Yep.
But no, not really. I mean, Paul Green did mention, Greenie came around to our house because he got the job and I was sort of still there, winding down. They were trying to get me to take all my leave and stuff. I said, I don't normally take leave at this time of the year, so you can stick that.
Yeah.
I'll keep my leave, thank you very much.
Yeah,
rather
pay me out.
You can pay me out. And anyway, so I said, well, I'll keep sitting in my office until Greenie turns up. Will you have to wait for me? Which was true. So I was just sitting there, not doing much. Anyway, and he came around to home and sat down, we had a beer and talked. And he just wanted to know the lay of the land. I mean, he had the job. And so anyway, so I was just talking about things and the squad and my ideas on it, who we should keep and who you could move on and things like that. So I was happy to do that. The decision was made. It was done and dusted. And Kath couldn't quite believe it, but anyway.
I'm with Kath.
Yeah, well, it was okay. I mean, I'd met Greenie before. And Paul had been up. He had some friends up in Townsville anyway, and we'd been to, I think, Matt Scott's wedding and things like that. So, and he was coming through the ranks as a coach. Yeah, well, I caught up with Matty Elliott because we had a coffee because he was moving off to Penrith and I was coming in. We were just talking about his thoughts. I was quite happy to have a chat with him because he had the squad, but he was losing a lot of players. Simon Wolford, Croker, Shifkoski, Jason Smith. There's about 1,000 games of NRL experience leaving the Raiders when I took over. That's why they predicted us to run last.
That's right. That was the prediction, wasn't it?
It was because we losing. Anyway, we didn't. I think we came 15th or 14th. Anyway, but we avoided the wooden spoon. So I met with him to have a chat. So there is some coaches will do that, like they get on well enough, or they just say, well, listen, it's beneficial to probably have a chat about the club. Some coaches won't. But I had a conversation with Paul about the lay of the land anyway, and I was still around. I didn't really have a job to go to until Surly called in up there and said that Cardi, would you come down and be a assistant coach with Cardi down here at the Titans? I said. There was an opportunity to go to West Tigers under Mick Potter, but I thought, the Gold Coast, we sort of used to have holidays up in the northern rivers anyway, at Cabarita. I thought, it'd be nice to come down here, and so off I came. So came down and been here ever since.
If you're enjoying Andy Raymond Unfiltered, the Legends series, we'd love for you to go to Apple, Spotify, or wherever you're listening and subscribe to the podcast and give us a 5-star rating and review. Best weekly review wins an Unfiltered Trucker's hat.
The relationship between an assistant coach and a head coach, I can't see it being anything but a juggling act because the assistant actually wants the top job despite their denials. And if he doesn't aspire to have the top job, you probably don't want him there. But he's also got to do the right thing and be seen to do the right thing. Is it a difficult juggling act between head coach and assistant coach?
It can be. I think the good guys are loyal.
Yep.
And the ones that aren't loyal get found out, I think. You can have conversations. And I have, to be honest, I've had conversations with one or two assistant coaches I've had, and I just had to just say it as it is. Look, I'm the head coach, you're an assistant coach, you're here because I value your input, but if I hear a point of difference to what I've said to the group, and it gets back to me that it came from you, and you haven't broached it with me privately first, you'll be sacked.
Get the knife out of my back.
I'll sack you on the spot.
Yep.
And it doesn't have to be anything major.
Yep.
I said, but you cannot even be thinking that. But I want your input. So we're not always going to agree on things. You want assistant coaches to toss up different angles. I said, but we do that in my office or your office, not with players around.
That's right.
I said, we might talk about things, and even when we're talking to the senior leadership group, we're not having different points of view if you're in on a meeting with senior leaders as well. So and I said I've only had 2 conversations like that in 10 years to 2 different coaches. So it's sort of, but by and large, and that's how I approach it, you've got to be loyal as an assistant coach. When I was Muzz's assistant coach, I didn't even think, I thought, how good was just being an assistant coach? I never thought I'll be a head coach. I thought, I'm coaching full time. How good's this? This will do me. How long can I do this for? Or go back to teaching. And that's why I was so surprised I went down to talk to the Raiders. And I think I got a bit of attention around Origin.
Yes.
For 6-7, for 2006 anyway, and then that was happening, and I was a Canberra boy, so it sort of fell into place. But I didn't have anyone out there beating my drum, and I certainly wasn't doing it myself. So I was just happy learning under Muzza, doing my job, and it was initially there was only 2 of us anyway, so we were flat out, and it was a time when sports data was coming out, so you got the big bricks emailed up to you all the way up to town. I'd go out to the airport, pick them up, come and download the games, and so you could actually start doing stuff on the computer pretty quickly rather than the old VHS cut and edit.
That was brutal.
That was. So anyway, but I think loyalty is paramount, and I think by and large, the coaches have got it.
Your time on the Gold Coast ended poorly and ended unfortunately. Your time there, though, how would you sum it up? There was a lot of work to do when you arrived.
Yeah, it was difficult. Cardi had done a fantastic job. Look, like Michael Searle and Cardi and the whole organisation, look, they got it up and running, and Paul Brown, they just got it going. And I remember coming to the launch here in Q1 and stuff, and it was fantastic. And to get a game away from the grand final, I think in 2010, their initial recruitment was excellent. Like the players they got here, it was, and things were going along fine. But it ended up being, well, how do you churn out the older players and replace them with quality players coming in, and how you do that became a bit of an issue, I thought, around the roster. And I just came down here to help Cardi, and I was happy. I love Cardi. He's a good coach, but the club was struggling financially.
Yes,
and and there wasn't the income. They around never really never recovered, and so it was a stage where they didn't own the building. There was debt mounting, and Surly was trying to keep things going, and it ended up being a board got appointed, and then it finally came to Darryl Kelly coming in with a bit of a rescue package to say, well, I'll put up a bit of money. He'd come up to the Gold Coast to retire, but he loved his footy, and he said, well, fortunately he tossed in a bit of money, and then the club was taken over by the NRL. I mean, it's a rugby league heartland, and it would have been a shame. And I don't think that was ever going to happen. The NRL did their homework. I mean, it's rugby league, up here anyway. It has been for a long time. But securing money from corporate people and businesses is very hard on the Gold Coast. There's not a lot of, despite what people, my opinion is, there's not a lot of money in town.
No.
And heads of businesses are in Melbourne. Sydney or Brisbane.
Yeah.
We're not in those parts. So you need to be very successful. So
Yep.
if you're winning 10 out of your 12 home games and you're getting, like they were getting good crowds,
Yeah.
you're getting average 18,000 to 20,000 every week, things are flying. But once that starts to drop off and your corporate's thinking, actually, we can't quite afford that corporate box anymore and sponsorship becomes hard and you're not winning games, and then it's quite a quick decline and the revenue's not coming in. So it looks like now they're on the right path too.
Yeah.
And Justin Holbrook's done a great job, and their roster's building.
In professional sport, though, in any sport, the head coach, shouldn't be concerning themselves with the business finances. I mean, that is the biggest distraction.
Yeah, well, it becomes a distraction because it is a distraction.
Yep.
Because not that I have to make any decisions about what they're doing business-wise. I mean, people do that. But the fact is
Still in your mind.
Well, the fact is if you can't spend your whole cap or
Yep.
the club can't afford to do things, we're on a budget. And that budget comes down to income, that money coming in to service the playing group. Whether or not it's going on a camp or we're self-driving a bus down to Ballina to do a camp that costs us $5,000 and the NRL tip in because we do a few school visits.
Yeah.
Compared to at the same time South Sydney went over to America and did a pre-season camp. That's the difference between the clubs. We're going down there and but we enjoyed it. It was great. But that was our budget. And so we couldn't really have those luxuries. But I was very happy with. We had a few distractions here. It was a real transition phase when we had the NRL ownership, the bailout there. It was difficult times. And I would have probably handled a couple of issues a bit differently. But by and large, to say I was disappointed how it transpired would be an understatement.
The Jared Haynes saga, one you'd rather forget?
Oh, look, it's just part of what it is. I mean, I don't... Jared's a pretty complex beast. He's the first to admit he's not the greatest trainer in the world. But, he can play football. He can attract people to watch him. He's certainly a talent. We didn't see the best of him. There were some distractions. There were things happening that, in my personal opinion, he wasn't prepared to go where he needed to go for what he was on. But in a corporate sense, it attracted sponsorship to the club and attracted some people on seats, so it was good. But
again, that is such a complex spider web, isn't it?
It is, and it's something that if you've got cultural issues, that it makes it very difficult. And so that could have been dealt with a bit differently, for sure. And I'll leave it at that. But at the end of the day, we went from a hard-working team that played finals footy to a team that was nowhere near playing finals footy within 10 months.
In a hypothetical, how would a chief financial officer at a football club deal with the football coach coming in and telling him where he should be spending his money? Because that was almost what they were doing to you. They were taking your salary cap off you. They were taking your pathways cap off you. Someone with a calculator was determining your program.
Well, we had to run with a budget, and we can all understand that. And if the money's not coming in through other areas, well, the football department cops it. Look, in mixed in all that, I will say they did a fantastic job. We got Parkwood up and running, like the training base there anyway. Like there were things happening that were making the club better. We went from having no base to training at the TSS school.
That's
for a
right.
while, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
And we were there, and they were very accommodating. But then when the scandal came out around the cocaine, obviously we had to move from there. Burleigh Bears were accommodating there. It was fantastic. We were working out of demountables, and it didn't matter. Had the oval and the space there, and we played finals footy. You don't need the flash centre to do that. You just need some hard-working players. And in the meantime, Darryl behind the scenes was looking at Parkwood and what we could do there. And they've got a fantastic facility there. And I'm just a bit sad that I couldn't be there for a few more years, but they've even improved it since then. So I think what they've got now from where they were, they've sort of had it all, lost it, and they've come back again. And I think that the organisation is on the up, and winning the last 5 games, I think that really has raised expectations for next season, and I think their roster's improving as well. So I think rugby league on the Gold Coast deserves a good team to support.
Agreed.
And a consistent team, so hopefully that happens.
Moving back into the Queensland system as an assistant in 2020 and winning against the odds, how satisfying?
Yeah, it was great. Look, I hadn't been, since 2009, so probably 11 years out of that sort of. But you forget, and it was even special because you normally come in for 3 9-week camps, say, and they were pretty good back in the day. But actually being in this bubble and being 25 days with 27 players and staff, it was unique.
Yeah.
And no one really thought we were a serious threat. And to be fair, we probably shouldn't have been. But there's these things happen all the time, in the game, and it's certainly been replicated in Origin over the years,
Hasn't it?
And it was just great. It was great to be working with Wayne, who I'd never really worked with, and Mal, who I knew, and then I'd be there as well, and we got on well, and the young boys that came in just stepped up.
Obviously very personally satisfying. Was Origin this year professionally reinvigorating? Your name is back out there. Do you want a full-time gig, or are you happy? I've been asked that a couple of times. I really haven't pushed for full-time, and that's not to say that, look, there's people out there jumping and saying, let's get Neil Henry to be a coach. I'm not promoting it. Yeah.
I have had a couple of opportunities to work in clubs, a couple of clubs as general manager of footy,
yep.
But I thought I just like my coaching, and then I have had a couple of offers to be an assistant coach, which I haven't taken up. So I haven't, but I'm sort of entrenched here down at Tugun. We built our house there. I'm happy here, and I've been able to do some coach education stuff with the NRL, the Rise Development Program for 13 to 15-year-olds. I've done some coaching with Brad Donald with the Gillaroos, Mal with the Prime Minister's 13, the World Nines with both the women's and the men's team. I had the junior Kangaroos for 2 years. Last year it was under 23s against France. It was a fantastic team. Hopefully that concept comes back like an Australia A team.
Yeah.
And if I can stay in that space and live here and do bits and pieces, but I really did enjoy some hands-on coaching.
A wonderful professional career to date, many memories and achievements, and I just get the feeling the journey is far from over. Neil Henry, you, sir, are a legend.
A new episode of the Legends series drops every Tuesday and the weekly Wodge every Thursday. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening and follow us on social media at The Andy Raymond. Then you won't miss a thing. Come back soon, Legends.